I'm Glenna Tinney, and I'm a retired Navy captain social worker. I was in the Navy for 24 years, providing services for military service members and their family members. I worked primarily in the Navy Medical Department. I managed the Navy Family Advocacy Program on the medical side for several years. That's the program responding to domestic violence and child abuse and neglect. I also managed the Navy Sexual Assault Program back in the mid-90s when we were first developing that program, which was the first one in DoD. Well, I think there are a lot of myths that surround intimate partner violence, and those myths are true for the military and veteran population as well as for the civilian population. And you know, some of that is that it only occurs in people who are low income. It only occurs with families that are people of color, that there is the connection that substance abuse, alcoholism causes intimate partner violence. For the military and veteran population, there seems to be a lot of belief that the co-occurring issues that can be related to combat, like post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury and depression and substance abuse, cause intimate partner violence, whereas it's not really causal, but they can be contributing factors to intimate partner violence. The primary data that is available related to intimate partner violence and what is called spouse abuse in the military is through the Military Family Advocacy Program, and they collect data from the services for all the incidents that occur. Spouse abuse is the term that is used, or actually I guess nowadays it's called domestic abuse, for when people are married to each other. It's either domestic abuse or domestic violence, and when people are not married to each other, they call it intimate partner violence, whereas I'm using the term intimate partner violence to be inclusive really of all of that. So the family advocacy statistics are the main statistics, and I can't really give exact numbers on that, but I do know that there is, at least over the years, I have always heard the assumption that there's more intimate partner violence and domestic abuse and violence in the military than there is in the civilian world, because people believe that people in the military, they're all trained to be violent, they're trained to kill, they all have guns, and therefore they are more violent in their intimate relationships. Up until 2010, we didn't really have any data to back that up, but there was a collaboration between the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, where they did a survey, the National Intimate and Sexual Violence Survey, where they did sampling for the military population, which is the first time that has ever occurred. So we actually did get data. There was a group of spouses of active duty men, and then there was part of that sampling were also active duty women. And the interesting thing that came out of that survey, which is the first data we really ever had comparing, was that there really wasn't much difference in terms of the incidence for sexual assault, intimate partner violence, and stalking. So that was pretty interesting that we actually got that data. Now there are articles and other surveys and studies that have said there's like 3 to 5 times more domestic violence in the military than in the civilian population, but there's always been a question about whether those adequately controlled for the variables in terms of age and marital status and those kind of factors that are specific to the military. Intimate partner violence victims in the military population as well as in the veteran population they underreport just like they do in the civilian population. And that they do that for a lot of reasons. And, you know, there's fear, often fear that because the perpetrator has threatened them and said, if you ever tell anybody, I will kill you. They may have actually, you know, taken weapons to threaten them with them. There's also the feeling of embarrassment and a sense of responsibility that it's kind of their fault, so they don't want to tell anybody. Plus, the perpetrator often tells them, if you tell anybody, they're not going to believe you anyway, because, you know, I'm a good guy and nobody's going to believe this. So that's a piece of the picture as well. For the military women, there's more a hesitation to tell anybody because they're afraid it will impact their career in a negative way. I mean, if they're viewed as being a victim, then the question is, can they actually do their job? You know, can they take leadership positions? Can they be promoted? Can they get, you know, increasingly responsible positions, and so they often don't want to tell anybody. So and the last place they want to tell is with their command, often when they're in the military. Once they get out of the military, however, once they are separated from the military, then often they do have more of a comfort level to communicate to healthcare providers. So when they go in to see their doctor or their nurse practitioner, they might have more comfort to tell those people, because there's also more of a sense of confidentiality and that information is going to be protected. Now sometimes they aren't going to come straight out and tell their provider that they're being abused, but if they're coming in and they have injuries and their explanations for those injuries are not consistent with this, the injuries are not consistent with the story for how they got that injury, then the healthcare provider might then think to ask more questions, to solicit more information from them about, kind of what's going on at home particularly. And then there's the whole area about screening in terms of universal screening. There's some controversy around that. Everybody's not in agreement with universal screening in the healthcare setting. That just means that you would screen everybody who comes in, particularly to certain clinics, coming into particularly OBGYN clinics, emergency medicine departments, mental health departments. When people have a history of trauma, regardless of what that might be, as children or as adults, there are a lot of questions that can be asked around soliciting that kind of information about adverse childhood experiences, and that can all be kind of put into screening. I know that at least I get my care in the DoD facility because I'm retired Navy, and so I go to an Army hospital. And I know that when I go in for my annual GYN appointment, they do ask me about feeling safe in my relationship and do I feel safe at home. I know that the VA is now moving toward implementing a domestic violence, intimate partner violence assistance program where they are piloting in several sites the e-hit screening tool, where they will be automatically asking the question for women veterans whether, there are several questions they would ask around whether or not there has been any experience of physical and or sexual violence in their intimate relationships. So screening is a piece of it. Just being alert to injuries, alert to depression, alert to a lot of anxiety, sleeplessness, some symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, which can be coming from a multitude of reasons. It can come from, like I said, prior trauma when they're young. It can come from combat experiences, but it can also come from being victimized within their intimate relationships. I think that one of the most important factors about is if you are going to screen, as a healthcare provider, if you're going to screen for intimate partner violence, you need to have all your ducks in a row before you ask any questions. So if you're going to ask the questions, you have to be prepared to address the problem when people say yes, that they are not safe, or they do not feel comfortable, or that this incident happened last night, or that this is how I got my injury. It's important to have developed the relationships either within your own facility or with community-based programs, particularly for the VA and DoD as well. I mean, in the Department of Defense, there's the Family Advocacy Program, which is present on every installation. So there are victim advocates and clinicians, and there are resources there. For the VA, as I said, they're implementing this program. So knowing what those resources are, ultimately, each facility, each veterans VA Medical Center will have a domestic violence coordinator who would be the liaison person to help connect with the community-based programs. But until that is in place, it's important, I think, for healthcare providers to have reached out into the community to find out what are the domestic violence programs out there. What is there a shelter? And perhaps had some opportunity to do some cross-training, have them come into the facility, the medical facility, to do some training to let people know what the resources are, as well as to do some training with them to let them know about either the installation in the military or the veterans facilities. So I think that connection is very important. Because again, you do not want to drop the ball. You do not want to open that door and then drop the ball and not be able to hook them up with appropriate resources. And I think it's important to do a warm handoff, and what I mean there is to have developed relationships with people in those organizations so that you can actually make a referral and talk with people and open that door, not just give them a piece of paper so that they leave and don't have a connection, because then the likelihood of them following through is even lower. I would also recommend that Futures Without Violence is a national domestic violence program that's based in San Francisco, and it is funded by the Office on Violence Against Women, and it is the National Center for it's a National Resource Center for Healthcare and Domestic Violence. So their website has a lot of good information and different kinds of resources and documents around some of these issues that relate to healthcare and domestic violence. So that is a resource that I would recommend as well. There's a belief that when there is intimate partner violence or domestic violence occurring in the military population and the veteran population, that somehow that is very different than when it occurs with people who have never had any connection to the military. And I just want to make clear that the dynamics of the domestic violence and intimate partner violence, the risk factors, the kind of level of dangerousness, it's all very similar for the military and veteran population as it is with the civilian population. So there's a lot more similarity than difference, and so I think that the belief that they're more violent and they all have guns, is not necessarily true. Everybody in the military is not trained to kill. Everybody does not carry a gun. And of course, these days with the civilian population, many people have weapons as well. So people need to kind of really think about the military is a microcosm of the larger society and has all the same kind of problems. And of course, the difference is that many people these days, particularly over the last decade, have gone to war zones. They've deployed to war zones. And some of those people are coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury, substance abuse, depression as co-occurring issues. Some of those people may have had some of those problems prior to deployment. Some people were already violent in their relationships prior to deployment, and some were not. So screening is very important. Assessment is very important to really tease out all of these variables and all these pieces. But the bottom line is, whenever you're dealing with domestic violence and intimate partner violence, regardless of who the population is, you want to err on the side of caution, because any case can become very dangerous, can become lethal, whether it's military related or whether it is the civilian population. So we want to take it seriously, and I think healthcare providers have an excellent role and are in an excellent position to help get people to resources and help them to get the assistance that they need.